Welcome to a rainy or snowy afternoon in Michigan, depending on the minute. I'm Laura Rosick. I'm the director of the Center for Southeast Asian Studies here at Michigan. Happy New Year, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are right now. And we're really happy to have you join us for today's lecture, Music and Incitement to Violence, Anti-Muslim Hate Music in Burma, Myanmar. Just a little bit of housekeeping is your cameras and microphones have been disabled. Anytime during the talk, you may submit a question via the Q&A function, and we will adjust these questions towards the end as time is permitting, and live captioning is available for you. So today we'll have some announcements and introductions, our presentation, and again, the Q&A session towards the end. We'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the International Institute and the Department of Asian Languages and Culture. And as always, we are grateful for the support provided for us with funding from the U.S. Department of Education, National Resource Center Title VI grant. For those of you who attend regularly, our next seminar will be Friday, March 4th. Jonathan Saha will talk about racial capitalism and interspecies empire in colonial Myanmar. Please join us for that. And today we're really happy to welcome our guest, Heather MacLachlan. Heather MacLachlan received her PhD from Cornell University in 2009 and is an associate professor of ethnomusicology and the interim director of women's and gender studies at the University of Dayton. Professor MacLachlan is the author of 2 scholarly books and numerous articles focusing on musicians among Burmese populations and on LGBTQ musical advocacy in the United States. Another note is she also serves as a volunteer guardian ad litem for the Montgomery County Juvenile Court in Dayton, Ohio. Her lecture will highlight a corpus of Burmese language, anti-Muslim hate songs archived on YouTube. Burma/Myanmar is a site of recent genocidal violence perpetrated against Muslims, and these songs are a part of the hate speech campaign which undergirds this violence. Using the definition of incitement articulated by the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, she argues that the lyrics of these songs constitute incitement to violence. Further, the comments written by YouTube listeners provide evidence that the songs provoke additional dehumanizing speech. The songs and their creators are therefore complicit in the recent violent persecutions of Muslims in Myanmar. So please, along with me, welcome Dr. MacLachlan today to the University of Michigan. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm deeply honored to be able to address the University of Michigan Center for Southeast Asian Studies today. In my presentation, I will share with you some excerpts from an article of mine that is forthcoming in the journal Ethnomusicology. The central argument of that article is that Burmese musicians are culpable in the trauma suffered by hundreds of thousands of people because the words contained in their songs have incited the violence perpetrated against those people. This is a bold claim, I acknowledge, and I make it while simultaneously warning all of you in attendance. My presentation will reference physical violence and genocide and will contain dehumanizing images and excerpts from religiously based hate speech. Please keep this in mind. One of the world's greatest human rights crises is unfolding on the border between Bangladesh and Myanmar. Approximately 1 million people from the Rohingya ethnic group have fled Myanmar, settling into huge refugee camps near Cox's Bazar. Rohingya people, who are mostly Muslim by faith, have been leaving Myanmar in great numbers since 2012, when anti-Muslim violence broke out in Rakhine State in the westernmost part of the country. The United Nations fact-finding mission, which investigated this violence, characterized these events as gravest crimes and concluded that they were committed with, quote, genocidal intent. Independent nation states and municipal authorities similarly criticized the Myanmar government, which oversees the National Army judged responsible for most of the burnings, rapes, torture, and killings of Rohingya people in the strongest of terms. The United States, for example, claimed that the violence leveled against the Rohingya constituted ethnic cleansing. Canada's Senate made the unprecedented move of formally revoking the honorary Canadian citizenship earlier bestowed on Aung San Suu Kyi, who was at the time Myanmar's head of state, and called her, quote, an accomplice of genocide. For the same reason, both the city of Oxford in the United Kingdom and the city of Dublin in the Republic of Ireland revoked Aung San Suu Kyi's Freedom of the City Awards. It is important to understand that Rohingya people are one of only a number of Muslim groups in the nation of Myanmar. Secondly, the recent persecution of Rohingya Muslims is only one episode in a century-long history of violent discrimination against Muslim people in that country. Since the late 1920s, so-called riots involving violent action by Buddhist laypeople and monks levied against Muslims have occurred repeatedly in cities and towns all across Myanmar. Since 2012, violence targeting Muslims has been especially acute. Scholars of the history of anti-Muslim violence in Burma, Myanmar, argue that the occurrences of the 21st century are fundamentally different from earlier outbreaks. Peter Koklanis, for example, says that the sectarian conflict of the 20th century is, quote, now more akin to terrorism. Minzin argues that anti-Muslim riots and conflicts of earlier times tended to be one-time events. What distinguishes the violent actions of the last decade is that they are perpetrated and sustained over time as a series of organized campaigns. Minzin goes on to explain that the organized campaign of the past decade is fueled by, quote, a new variable, which is undeterred propagation of hate speech coupled with clear political coordination. Unlike under previous regimes, where anti-Muslim hate speech was word-of-mouth propaganda manufactured by military intelligence officers or underground publications, people can now hear vitriolic attacks against Muslims in Buddhist religious sermons from the intrusive loudspeakers of local monasteries or donation stations. People encounter hate speech in books and handouts, watch it on DVDs that are conveniently available from sellers at almost every traffic junction, and on social media, close quote. Scholars and concerned parties worldwide have been attentive to the important role that hate speech, especially that disseminated by Facebook, is playing in anti-Muslim violence in Myanmar. None, however, have acknowledged that the post-2012 anti-Muslim discourse is also present in popular song, nor that these songs are hosted on YouTube, a social media giant which has never been held to account for its role in fostering the prejudice that underpins the recent violence. I have identified a small corpus of recently recorded pop songs, all in the Burmese language, and all available on YouTube, which I am labeling anti-Muslim hate songs. I will begin by sharing one. This is titled, Losing One's Nationality is a Concerning Issue. If you are interested in hearing other examples of anti-Muslim hate songs, please let me know and I can share those during our question and answer session. For the moment, I will transfer to our example. And Jonathan, may I ask you to confirm that you can see and hear this video? Jonathan?
You're good.
And it goes on, but that's enough to give you a sense of one of the songs. Let me go back now to my PowerPoint slide. The lyrics of Losing One's Nationality elucidate the main themes of the whole corpus of anti-Muslim hate songs. These themes are also ever present in the anti-Muslim discourse, which circulates in Myanmar today. These themes are, first, citizenship in Myanmar, Burman ethnicity, and adherence to Buddhism are inextricably linked, and therefore Muslims do not belong or should not belong to the Myanmar nation. Here is how that theme is articulated in Losing One's Nationality. Theme 2 is Buddhism and Buddhist people must be protected with violence if necessary. And here we can see how the lyricist for Losing One Nationality explains it. The third theme that appears over and over in anti-Muslim hate songs is, listeners should not marry Muslims. Here is how it appears in Losing One's Nationality. And the fourth theme found in the lyrics of anti-Muslim hate songs is, listeners should not patronize Muslim-owned businesses. Once again, from Losing One's Nationality. The hate speech contained in Burmese language anti-Muslim hate songs is undoubtedly bigoted and offensive. I go further by arguing that these songs actually incite Buddhist people to take violent action against their Muslim neighbors. In making this argument, I depend on the definition of incitement formulated by the judges of the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, or ICTR, in what is often referred to as the media case. In litigating the media case, the ICTR charged and convicted 3 defendants, 2 of whom co-founded a Rwandan radio station, and 1 of whom was a newspaper editor, of, quote, direct and public incitement to commit genocide. Importantly, the definition of incitement articulated in the media case expressly differentiates between inciting speech and later violent acts. The ICTR definition clearly reveals that, quote, the fact that a message widely diffused through mass media could not be directly tied to specific acts of killing does not absolve the message's master of the crime of genocide, close quote. I do not claim that any person or group of persons in Myanmar ever listened to an inciting song and subsequently committed violence against Muslim victims as a direct result of being inspired by the song. I have no evidence of any such cause and effect relationship, and in fact, I've never heard of it nor read reports of it. With all that said, I maintain that anti-Muslim hate songs like Losing One's Nationality do contain hate speech, and that this speech has played a role in inciting the anti-Muslim violence present in Myanmar today. The ICTR decision identified 4 criteria to determine whether hate speech disseminated via mass media constitutes the legitimate exercise of freedom of expression or the commission of criminal incitement. And those 4 criteria are: number 1, purpose; number 2, text; number 3, context; and number 4, the relationship between speaker and subject. My analysis revealed that Burmese anti-Muslim hate songs meet all 4 of these criteria. Due to time constraints today, I will explore only the 3rd criteria. That is, the context in which anti-Muslim hate songs are created and heard in Myanmar since 2012. The circumstances surrounding the dissemination of a hateful text are central to determining that text's significance, as the ICTR media case decision makes clear. In contemporary Myanmar, evidence is abundant that Muslims are the target of ever-increasing discrimination, both legal and extra-legal. The national government's systematic refusal to grant many Muslims, including most Rohingya people, legal citizenship, is one of the better-known manifestations of this discrimination. In 2015, the Myanmar Parliament passed a package of 4 race and religion laws that have been internationally condemned as discriminatory toward Myanmar Muslims. One of the laws requires that Buddhist women who wish to marry non-Buddhist men must apply for the right to do so and then wait for the approval of local authorities, approval which we can safely assume may be long in coming. This law was initially proposed by U Widathu, the Buddhist monk who is the leading figure in Myanmar's anti-Muslim movement, and the text was drafted by lawyers sympathetic to the cause. These laws were presented to Parliament along with the signatures of 2.5 million supporters. U Widathu and his allies campaigned against the National League for Democracy, or NLD, in 2015. When the NLD won the 2015 election, U Widathu promised to bring the NLD down if they dared to remove the laws. The months preceding the 2015 election revealed the dominant political culture in Myanmar. During the election campaign, the smear tactic of being too Muslim-friendly proved so effective that political parties disqualified many Muslim candidates who wished to stand for election. Mabatha, a Buddhist organization led by U Widathu, also passed out stickers that were to be placed at the front entrance of businesses owned by Buddhists so that consumers could target their shopping, avoiding Muslim-owned shops. The context for songs like Losing One's Nationality reveals that the song points not to some minority political position, nor to the bizarre ideas of a splinter group, but rather to an anti-Muslim prejudice that is widespread and normalized among Myanmar Buddhists. Furthermore, members of the Buddhist majority have violently persecuted communities belonging to the Muslim minority on numerous occasions during the past century. These songs are circulating at a time when Myanmar Muslims are again subject to violent attacks, are targeted by discriminatory laws, and are vilified in Buddhist sermons and in a multitude of hateful postings on the internet. These songs are therefore, quote, likely to exacerbate an already explosive situation, in the words of the ICTR. YouTube.com announced that as of December 2018, the company is making better efforts to remove what they called violative content and violative comments. As of today, however, these efforts have not extended to Burmese language anti-Muslim hate songs. The songs are therefore continuing to contribute to Myanmar's cyberspace, which is not an isolated domain of social action, but rather an extension of pre-existing relationships, networks, and cultural practices. Given that internet usage is increasing rapidly in Myanmar, or it was until very recently, it is vitally important to understand how Myanmar's current anti-Muslim campaign is being furthered in that cyberspace. As this presentation has argued, that campaign is being advanced by a corpus of songs, the lyrics of which incite listeners to violence and to genocide. The creators and disseminators of those songs are therefore complicit in some of the largest scale trauma of the early 21st century. Thank you for your attention. I welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you so much for that great talk. That was thought-provoking. And we've opened up the Q&A if anybody would like to enter their questions. I was wondering about the extent of the number of these hate songs. How extensive is this collection, and is it limited to Myanmar, or is it around countries around there? Do they have a lot of these hate songs too?
So I've only looked at the Myanmar case. I know that anti-Muslim hate speech is increasing in India. And interestingly, I know from a young scholar at the University of Chicago, so is the Rohingya community also increasingly recording songs that are saying, "I am Rohingya and you can't oppress me," would be sort of the summary of that message. So I only know about inside Myanmar, and I was only able to identify 6 of these songs. I want to say just a word about my own limitations in doing this research, which is that I had an experience doing it that I've never had in doing research in Myanmar since 2007. Myanmar people are incredibly generous and welcoming, and they have been so gracious to me over the years as I've researched a number of topics. This topic, however, it became very clear to me that people did not want to speak to me about it. And in the longer version of this research, which is the published article or soon to be published article, I speak about this, about how many people, when they found out what exactly I wanted to talk about, said that they were no longer willing to continue with the interview. I had clear evidence that people lied to me about even knowing about the existence of these songs. People who said they had no idea what they were, I then later heard them singing along with the recordings, things like that. So there is an amount of shame, I would say, that I only partially was able to penetrate. So there may be more of these songs and they may be circulating widely. And because of my own limitations, I'm unable to identify them. But in my case, I found 6 songs.
So Margaret Scott, who's a guest, is asking, since the coup, many claim that young people have shifted their views on Burma Buddhist nationalism and are now empathetic to the discrimination against Rohingya. Do you see any evidence of this?
I've heard this claim too. I hope it's true. I really do. I haven't, you know me, I have to move on and research something new. I was sharing with Laura earlier that over the last 6 months of 2021, I was writing an article about anti-coup songs. So songs that specifically protest the military takeover of February 1, 2021. There's certainly no anti-Muslim discourse in those songs. There is anti-LGBT discourse in those songs, though, which is interesting. So, for example, criticizing General MacLachlan, who is the dictator at the head of the junta, and criticizing him specifically for being effeminate or saying that he wears high heels, this kind of discourse. So that was an interesting thing to notice, but I did not encounter any kind of anti-Muslim messaging in any of those new songs.
So we have another question from Nina Egert, who's a guest. Are religious figures engaged in the encouragement of violence against, against Muslims, or is this hate speech primarily coming from a lay population, giving its own spin on what it means to be Buddhist? That's a good question.
Yeah, so I mentioned the monk Uwirathu, who's a very well-known figure who has committed his life to the monkhood, so a religious leader, as being a leading figure in anti-Muslim discourse. Now, there are monks, and I document this in the article, significant numbers of monks who have spoken against Uwirathu. So we can't say it's the entire monkhood that shares this kind of perspective. I met monks who flat out told me that the Muslim community is importing food from Saudi Arabia that is poisoned, and they sell it in their shops to try to kill Buddhists, for instance. And it's disturbing because monks have a tremendous influence average Buddhists. They tend to take what monks say very seriously, and there's been well-documented exploitations of this trust. For example, people who say they can tell, monks who say they can tell you what number is going to win the lottery or whatever. Another point to make on this is that the monkhood isn't a one and done experience the way it is, for example, a Catholic Christian. So it is expected that most or all Buddhist boys and men will at some point enter the monkhood, even if that's just for 2 weeks during summer holiday when they're 14 years old or something like that. So that said, it does seem to be led, this anti-Muslim movement, by prominent charismatic monks, but it certainly has plenty of support among lay people. And the people who are creating these songs and posting them to the internet, to my limited knowledge, are all lay people.
Thanks. So Hugh Fung, who's a faculty here, asked if you can give us some sense of when these songs started to be circulated, in what context these songs were created, who would be behind the circulations of these songs? Thank you.
Yeah. So these songs are created after 2012 and basically between 2012 and 2017, the ones that I have been able to identify. They are circulated mostly on Facebook. You may have heard the expression that in Myanmar, Facebook is the internet, and there's a reason why people say that. It's largely true. So these songs, as I was able to analyze them on YouTube, don't seem to be that impactful, honestly. So the one that has the most views has like 500,000, which isn't particularly large in YouTube numbers, right? But what we know for certain is these songs are much more commonly encountered by Myanmar people on Facebook. YouTube, it actually, since the coup, seems to be used more by Myanmar people because there is a strong perception that the military junta is monitoring Facebook more closely, and therefore, if people want to freely express themselves, especially through music, they're wiser to post it to YouTube. That said, I can't say with any real specificity like how widely these songs are known and loved. What I can say is the comments that are left by YouTube listeners form part of the analysis that I didn't speak about in the talk, but it's a fairly substantial part of the article that I wrote. And basically what it boiled down to is about 75% of the comments are openly supportive of the songs. They reiterate the themes of the songs. And in some cases, about 15%, they go further, they amplify the dehumanizing speech contained in the songs. So my point is not that I can make a really specific claim about the impact, but to the extent that they have an impact, they are appreciated, these songs, and they are further provoking more hate speech that is visible right there on YouTube. So again, my claim here is not that this is a particularly wide or large phenomenon, but that it exists, and that's important because so many of us, and I include myself in this, I am a music teacher. We spend our lives thinking that music is an innocent phenomenon or even a substantively good phenomenon. And in fact, music is a neutral phenomenon and it can be used to negative purposes. And this is one of those examples. So that's the point that I'm trying to make.
So Jonathan actually asked a question that I was thinking about too. How many of these anti-Muslim songs are utilizing genres such as hip hop? What's the age range of these artists? And I noticed that too. They're very catchy and pop oriented.
Yeah. So 2 of the 6 that I found had substantial sections that were rapped. So we could say within the hip hop umbrella. And the others were what we might call popular international pop style of the late 20th century. What I thought was extremely interesting was this example that I played today. I chose it for the talk because it's the longest and it has the most words in it. So it just good to use as an example because it's so rich in content. But the other songs, while shorter, two of them especially, and I am thinking here about the best known one, which is called Oath, clearly were recorded in recording studios. They have professional production values. And the way the choruses, I guess you would say, the repeated sections of the song are structured is that there's a kind of a call and response. So a 2 or 3 note phrase, which is then echoed. And so it's very encouraging to you as a listener to repeat the phrase, right? To actively engage. Da, 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 like that. You can echo it immediately. It's catchy, it's singable. So anyway, going back to what is the role of the monks, Oath became, the song Oath is the reason I started this research, because I read in the New York Times that monks were holding rallies to preach this message of anti-Muslim hate. And they were frequently at these rallies before their sermons broadcasting this recording Oath at very high volume. And so I became determined to track down that song and then discovered other songs subsequently. Oath is one of the ones that was clearly recorded by professional musicians.
So Kate Barlow is asking if there's been an increase in the presence of hate speech in songs in Myanmar, or has it always been there? What do you think accounts for the increase if there was one?
Yeah, I don't know if there's been an increase. Again, it proved so difficult to talk to people about these songs. The kinds of people who are willing to speak with a foreign researcher are generally from the middle class, the upper middle class, and they either don't share these sentiments or they may share them, but they're not, they're embarrassed that their country is becoming known internationally for this kind of prejudice, and they just were unwilling to speak about it. So I don't know if there were hate songs prior to this, and I don't know that there's been any particular increase. Certainly the hate speech in terms of internet postings as posted on Facebook, that has been analyzed by other people. And that's why Mark Zuckerberg was actually called to give account for Facebook's role in the Myanmar genocide in front of the US Congress, the US Senate, pardon me, because he and his company had been written about as being specifically culpable in perpetuating hate speech. But as for songs, to the extent that they exist post 2012, I would say there's one very good reason why the amateur kind of songs like the one you heard today exist, because the technology is now much more available to people around the world, and especially to middle class income people in Myanmar. So you can actually make a song on your laptop and you can upload it to the internet for the whole world to hear as a private citizen. You don't need a whole lot of money or a whole lot of specialized knowledge to be able to do that. So if you were interested in asserting your anti-Muslim sentiments through song, it became much more possible right around the time that this campaign of 2012 kicked off.
So Eric White, hey Eric, is asking, I'm wondering to what degree the moral logic behind the UN international community's understanding of speech inciting violence is legible within a Burmese moral imagination. Buddhism, for instance, has a very nuanced and complicated understanding of the relationship between intention, action, and consequences, both wholesome and unwholesome. I can imagine, therefore, that they might claim that it's morally necessary to distinguish between hate speech that facilitates 1, prejudice, chauvinism, and discrimination, 2, repression and coercion, and 3, violence leading to death, intentional and unintentional. And you can open your Q&A if you want to read that too.
Okay.
It's a long question.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I would say from your question, you are much more qualified to speak on this than me, because you have a better understanding of Theravada Buddhism. So definitely, I'm doing the classic thing here. I am an outsider scholar, and I am imposing an outside definition of a tendentious kind of concept on the Myanmar case. And I acknowledge that.
And Eric, if you want to type something in or say something, we'd be happy to turn on your mic too, Eric. And Christiane Castro, hey, Christiane, is asking, she thanked you for your talk. One of the interesting things we sometimes see on social media are music conversations where artists or users respond to one another through song. Is there also a corpus of songs in opposition to these, particularly from people in the diaspora who feel safer in posting them?
I found one. So I don't know how much we could say that constitutes a discourse or a conversation, but I did find one. So there, just to explain, there is a song in this corpus that I'm identifying that is anti-Muslim hate speech that focuses on Uwirathu. Uwirathu, he's so great. He's our hero. He's protecting us. We should all support him. Uwirathu. And so this is one of the ones where the chorus is really sing-alongable because it goes Wirathu, Wirathu, and you can just sort of chant along, right? Well, it turned out somebody subsequently recorded a song that said, no, Uwirathu is a malevolent actor, basically, and you should not listen to him, and he should be quiet, and we are ashamed of him. So that did happen.
Thanks. And Daria Alakani asked, can you share the importance of songs in Myanmar society today and throughout the course of recent history? How else has song been used?
Yeah. So in the same ways that people universally use it, which is to say many, many, many ways. And this is interesting in that, as has already been explained here, Myanmar is, the dominant population anyway, is Theravada Buddhist and deeply committed to Theravada Buddhism. The seventh precept of Theravada Buddhism is that monks and nuns shall never listen to music, sing, dance, play instruments, or otherwise participate in music. This is a teaching. And as I mentioned, almost all Buddhist boys, any family that can afford it basically, spend some time in the monkhood, right? Where there's this clear prohibition against musical involvement. But despite this, it's as musical a country as any country, with people using music for all kinds of rituals and to celebrate their faith in Buddha. There's a whole genre called Dhamma or Dharma songs that really say, oh, Buddha, you know, your name is the greatest name. We must all try to be compassionate. May mercy fall on all human beings who hear this song. You know, these kinds of Buddhist convictions are evident in those songs. You know, I would, if I may, just talk a little bit about this recent research because I'm excited about it. People writing these anti-coup songs. So these, I analyze them as part and parcel of this larger, shall we say, complex of songs which date back at least to the 1980s, which are protest songs that are actually short and simple and are intended for people who are actively protesting. So in the street, in the act of publicly opposing authority. And these are songs that they can sing. So there's, depending how you want to sort of figure it out, there's like 4 or 5 of those. And those have existed, like I said, since the 1980s and are very much loved by people protesting in 2021 because they have that historic resonance with earlier protests, right? Particularly the 1988 protests. But then there are all these new songs as well that advance the same message of opposition to authority, condemning specific people. So Min Aung Hlaing especially gets named, but so do others. And advocating all of us to be united in our fight for democracy, being willing to sacrifice our lives for this cause. So that's just one recent purpose to which music has been put.
So Mike McGovern, one of our faculty members here in anthropology, is thank you for your talk. Like you, my experience in Myanmar has been that people are overwhelmingly kind, welcoming, and humane, while at the same time, the vast majority shared the varying extents, the Islamophobic common sense evidence in the song you analyzed. My question is, you have emphasized the issue of legal culpability of the musicians and producers. To the extent that they are essentially reproducing the kinds of talk one could hear in most tea shops, on the sidewalks, or elsewhere, what would the reason be for singling out the musicians? In Rwanda, my understanding is that the journalists charged shaped opinion and mobilized people in ways that hadn't already existed.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I'm not saying I argue, I'm just not sure that what the sequence of events really was in Rwanda. The musician at the center of the media case was not convicted. Yeah, he had a very famous song about how Tutsis are cockroaches, and it was played apparently incessantly on this particular radio station multiple times a day. And for that, he was charged, but ultimately he was convicted for a speech that he gave, not the song that he wrote. Anyway, I singled out the musicians because I'm a music scholar, right? That's what I pay attention to, is musicians and the music they make. And I actually don't in the article name any names, and not because I'm afraid to, it's because I couldn't find them. So there are a couple of these YouTube videos where they, the first screen of the video will say words by, music by, recorded at such and such studio. And every time I had any hint of who the creator of the song might be, I did everything I could to track them down. I had my little team of 5 Myanmar nationals who were helping me do this research, all fluent speakers of Burmese. And so they made the phone calls so I wouldn't give myself away with my bad accent, right? My foreign accent. And together we did everything we could to try to get people to talk to us, but they wouldn't. And ultimately what I said in the article was, you know what? It doesn't matter who the specific individuals are because of what you said, because really what they're doing is they're reflecting a discourse that a lot of people engage in. 2.5 million people signed a petition to have those race and religion laws passed. 2.5 million people, right? So it would be kind of redundant, I think, to specify particular individuals who created like a handful of songs. What I'm trying to say here is that music is part of this campaign, and it is being used to malign purposes.
Well, just if I jump in here, not to let's see, I don't know if that's my speaker. Oh no. I mean, but it does seem like you are arguing a little bit that they are inciting, that the act of, there's the difference between saying something on the street to somebody and the act of uploading a song that invites commentary that perpetuates this, right? So, it's a little bit, not dissimilar to what's going on in our country right now, or what did over the last, 5 or 6 years, where, standing outside the Capitol and saying, go take our country back is a lot different than saying it, in a bar somewhere. So there is some level of incitement, it seems that you're arguing.
Yeah. I am arguing that they are inciting violence and genocide. I am not specifying who they are.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying, not specifying them. And you're arguing that YouTube or Facebook and all these things are complicit as well.
Well, absolutely. YouTube has its standards that itself trumpets, right? Mm-hmm. And that it's doing work constantly to try to eliminate such hateful messages from its platform. But these songs have been there, like they're still there. I can click mm-hmm. any one of these links and you'll still find them there, and people are still able to comment and hear them. So again, YouTube not being the most important site that Myanmar people would ever visit, just a convenient place for me, particularly as a scholar, to find these songs because the comments are so clearly linked to each individual song. And that's what I wanted to get at, was what was the reaction to the song. That's a lot harder to track on Facebook, right? But they do definitely circulate on Facebook as well.
Although I talked a class, distance learning class to some students in Myanmar last semester because they didn't have a professor. They all talked about YouTube. I asked them how they know K-pop because they all know K-pop. And they said they watch K-pop on YouTube, as does my daughter. So it seems like it's pretty widely, especially in younger generations. It sounds like that's where they get a lot of their pop culture is from YouTube.
Yeah, and TikTok and all of that. Yeah. So as I'm sure many on this call will know, just in the past week, the junta has tried again to severely limit internet access. And it's not clear that that will happen. We may have already passed a tipping point in many countries where it is impossible to have a functioning economy without the internet that is widely available to the population, in which case the population has a greater voice.
See, Eric has a follow-up question. How have the Burmese responded to UN arguments about hate speech and inciting violence? Which communities recognize and accept the argument and which don't?
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about my attempted ethnographic work in 2018. The students who were, they were university students, I should say, so in their early 20s, who were on my research team, were very supportive, and they would say, this is really bad, Siama, and did you know there's another song? They scoured the YouTube for me on my behalf to find these songs. So these were upwardly mobile people who spoke English well, who valued Western education. That's why they were attending the private university where I was a visiting professor. I'll tell you a quick story. So one of them comes from rural Karen state in the east. And she sat me down one day and she said, you know, you've been doing this project and I want to tell you, my mom, she sings a song like this. She sings it when she teaches Dhamma school. So Dhamma school is like Buddhist Sunday school for little kids. And these Dhamma schools were really encouraged by Mabatha, Uwirathu's organization. One of his points is like, we Buddhists, we have to be more firm in our Buddhism. Therefore, we have to know about it. We have to know the basic tenets of Buddhism. And so we've got to teach it. We have to teach it to kids when they're young. So we should have these Dhamma schools. She said, my mom, I've heard her do it. She sings this song and she said, I don't remember exactly, but it's something like, don't buy from Muslims. You know, it's a little kid's song. I said, let's phone your mom. Let's ask her. So she phones and she starts, you know, I can hear her end of the conversation and they have a long and trusting relationship. So her mom starts to speak about this, but fairly soon the call ends. And I said, well, what did she say? And she said, well, you know, it's not really her choice to sing this song. It's part of the Dhamma school curriculum. I said, okay. About an hour later, her mom phoned back. She said, no. She said, I'm wrong. I remembered wrong. I never sing a song like that. Tell your teacher. It was a clarifying moment for me. Among people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, there is an awareness that internationally, this perspective is not only not shared, but condemned. And there is some shame about it that prevents me from really knowing how widely these songs are embraced and how widely they are dismissed.
Wow. So Hugh has another question, and she would like to learn a bit more about the use of songs and music as a political tool in the history of Myanmar. Thank you.
Yeah, so I am not a historian of Myanmar, I'm sorry to say. Here's one thing I can tell you. So it was in the 1910s, so this is the time when the British colonial government was still very much firmly in control of Myanmar, that young activists who were doing street protests started chanting Doa Ye, Doa Ye. And anybody who you know, has spent some time in Burma, you'll recognize this slogan or this saying, Doa Ye. It means roughly like our affair or our concern, as in our country should have self-determination. It's our affair, it's our thing, right? So Fast forward all the way to 2021, a lot of these anti-coup songs include this chant, doa ye, and some of them are rap songs, lots of them are, but lots of them aren't, right? And so they will, it'll be melodic singing of pitched sound, right? And then there'll be this portion where they chant doa ye, right? There's a song titled Doa Ye, as a matter of fact. So yeah, in my reading and in my writing, I don't know of music being specifically, how can we say, in opposition to government much before the 1980s. It may have been, and I just don't know about it. What I do know is in 1962 was the first military coup by the same people, truly the same people who conducted the coup in 2021, excuse me. So anyway, after 1962, around the late 1960s, the technology that we associate with popular music, like recording studios, microphones, tape recording, that started to become available in Myanmar. And the young generation, I guess baby boomers, we would call them in America, they started recording popular music. And the military junta tried to repress it. They said it was un-Burmese, it was associated with the corrupt West, it was not to be, they were going to censor it and not going to engage in it. They lost that fight. So by like 1974, they had figured out like everybody loves this stuff. Everybody wants to listen to it. So if you can't beat them, join them. So what they started to do was they would contact the most popular working musicians and they would say, hi, this is the local general in charge of your area. And we need you to write a song for the bridge opening, that we're going to have a celebration because we built a new bridge and there's going to be a ceremony. You need to write a song for that. Or even more perniciously, we're having an election. They would have these fake elections every year. And then like, it would turn out that 98% of people voted that the military stay in power, right? But anyway, we're going to have an election and we're going to have like commercials on TV to promote people to come out and vote in the election. We need you to write a song for the commercial to encourage people to come out and vote. So I wrote about this in my first book, about the moral quandary that musicians were in. So do you cooperate? Do you create one of these so-called political songs? And are you going to be complicit in the government's agenda? If you refuse, this actually happened, you could be put in jail. You could lose your career, which means your family doesn't eat. So, what do you choose? And people made really tough decisions. It's hard to, in any context, I'm sure, but I can only speak about my research area. It is hard to stand up to a military, to an armed authority, right? And it's incredible the bravery of people who do, to openly express opposition. So anyway, generally what musicians who talked to me about this did was they said, I will create the song, but only on the condition that you don't associate my name with it at all. It has to remain completely anonymous, or I won't accept any money for it. Or they would say things like, yeah, I'll record the song. I'll meet you at the studio on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, they would be very ill and unable to come in. So these other ways of kind of limiting their cooperation with this cruel authority. Yeah.
Wow. And I think with that, we're just about out of time. And I just wanted to thank you again, Heather, for such a great talk. Thank our whole audience for a really good discussion. And again, I mentioned to Heather as she started, I said, this is a topic and an issue that kind of transcends Myanmar and goes to just about every conflict or non-conflict that we have now, is how we regulate this kind of hate speech and the incitement, or who's responsible. So I think it's important to know about. I really appreciate you coming to talk today. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for coming and being interactive and asking so many great questions. And we will see you in March. Enjoy the rest of February. Happy Valentine's Day and Happy New Year to those of you who are celebrating New Year right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a great honor.